W. Jeff Bishop is the director of the Funk Heritage Center and Bennett History Museum at Reinhardt University. He teaches classes on Native American history and museum studies at Reinhardt and has lectured on topics of Southern Indigenous history throughout the region. He served for nearly a decade as state chapter president for the Trail of Tears Association and worked with the National Park Service to research and interpret the Cedar Town Cherokee Removal campsite, the Chief John Ross home site, the Running Waters Council Ground, and many other sites related to Cherokee removal. Mr. Bishop has written books on Southern towns and Cherokee removal and is a graduate of the University of Georgia and the University of West Georgia. He recently was appointed by the governor to serve a third term on the Georgia Historical Records Advisory Council. Accompanying Mr. Bishop is Simone Cramer Thorne, who is a Reinhardt University student, Funk Heritage Center student worker, and Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians tribal citizen. Also joining him is Ariana Persico, who is a Chippewa descendant, a UGA doctoral candidate, and recently began a job at the University of Alabama. Dr. Andrew Jones is an assistant professor at Reinhardt University, and Steve Mathis of the Georgia Cherokee Community Alliance and tribal citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Great. Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bishop for this presentation. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Thanks. It's great to be here at the Georgia Archives today. It's been a beautiful facility. I love being here. Okay, so we're going to talk about a place where I work and love to work, love going every day, the Funk Heritage Center. Have y'all ever been to the Funk Heritage Center? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's right in the heart of the old Cherokee Nation. So the Cherokee Nation has changed over time, of course, tremendously. This shows the original extent of the Cherokee Nation. With hunting grounds extending all the way up to Kentucky. So it actually originally encompassed the entire state, and also large sections of Virginia, North Carolina, Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, Northeast Alabama, and of course, Northwest Georgia. So that shows all the different sessions that occurred over time. So eventually, the size of the Cherokee Nation decreased to this is more or less what it was at the time of removal. And we at the Funk Heritage Center are located in this spot right here where it says Hickory Log. So all of the artifacts from the Cherokee village of Hickory Log are actually, most of them at the University of Georgia Archaeology Lab, but the ones that are on display are at the Funk Heritage Center. So if you want to know more about that place, which is actually the history of that place extends all the way back into the Archaic period. So we're talking about a place with deep, deep history. And of course, we're finding out all the time that history goes back so much farther than anyone suspected. Originally, we thought that the Clovis culture was the beginning of the story of Native people in North America. But now we're finding that history goes back thousands and thousands of years earlier. So it's exciting to be reading about that, just as you all are, with each new discovery. But we, located in the central part of what used to be the Cherokee Nation, we have a mission at the Funk Heritage Center, which is to tell that story of the early Appalachian settlers and the Southeastern Indians through educational programs, through our collections, and through our care and exhibitions of artifacts. So now that has become a little more complicated now that we have NAGPRA to comply with, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. And so one of the things we're trying to do is demythologize. There's this concept of the disappearing Indian that has been the prevailing concept, I think, for well over 100 years. And you'll see this expressed in exhibits in museums and also in the way the markers, the historical markers have been worded. This idea that because of the march of Western civilization and quote unquote progress, the native peoples had to give way to that, had to succumb to that progress, and actually have been disappearing, supposedly, right? This idea of the vanishing Indian, that the West has no space for Indian cultures or Indian peoples anymore. And so that is a myth that has been sort of hardwired into the way that we tell these stories. And what we've been trying to do at the Funk Heritage Center is deconstruct that. Because as we know, Native peoples have not disappeared. How many of you here are Natives today? Yeah, quite a few. And we think, oh, well, once, there were so many Native people in the Southeast and in Georgia and in the Cherokee Nation, the old Cherokee Nation, and it was 15,000 was the number, 15,000. 4,000 of those people died on the Trail of Tears. So how many Cherokee people are there today? We're talking 360,000. So is that disappearance? No. There actually are far more Cherokee people today than there were at the time of the removal of the Trail of Tears. So they've not disappeared at all. And so what we are doing at the Funk Heritage Center is working with the tribes, the tribal citizens, to tell these stories. And at the same time, sometimes comfortably, sometimes uncomfortably, we also are charged with telling the story of the Appalachian settlers who replaced them in what used to be the Cherokee Nation. So how do we grapple with that? How do we grapple with the fact that we have these missions that seem incongruous, telling the story of the Cherokee people and then also telling the story of the settlers? So we have several means at our disposal to try and accomplish this mission. One is through living history. We have a lot of, if you've ever been to Colonial Williamsburg and you've seen people who dress up in period clothing and tell the stories of what it was like to live in Colonial Williamsburg, back in the day, it's a little bit more complicated for us. Can you guess why?
Not a written record in all cases.
Could be, in some cases, no written record. Yeah, true. And also, let's say that someone wants to have, Sequoia talk to the visitors at the museum about the invention of the syllabary. Do we have someone who's Native to tell that story? Is it appropriate for a white person to dress up as Sequoia to tell that story? These are the things that we grapple with. So. Events. We have a bluegrass festival that occurs every year. We also have what we call History Alive, which we have tens of thousands of students come through and visit the museum on field trips. We also have events like we had the Cherokee Nation who came in September and taught. They sent emissaries to teach the official Cherokee Nation history course. So this is what we're trying to move towards, is having more and more events that are in partnership with the Cherokee Nation, with the Eastern Band, that give a platform for Indigenous people to tell their own story. We also do this through lectures. We've had a number of Cherokee citizens who've written books and who've given lectures here at the Funk Heritage Center. Also exhibits. Trying to do at least one major new exhibit every year. Many of these focus on Indigenous history. Music. We have Appalachian music that we have as part of the field trip experiences. We do summer camps as well. We have a research library where we have actually a lot of, one of the things that happened as a result of the Cherokee Nation history course is we had a number of Cherokee citizens who had their interest sparked about their own heritage, about their own ancestors who lived in Northwest Georgia. And so we do have some claims books, census records, memoirs, diaries, resources that they can use to try and research their own histories. We also have the Museum Studies program, the history program, and environmental studies as well, where we're studying Appalachian plants and native history, and also the everyday processes of museums. And students have really dug deep into the native plants this semester. We've had a chance to go and see, we have a grove of chestnuts. Chestnuts used to be the major tree of the old forest, but of course the blight did away with most of the chestnuts, but now there's a hybridization program where they're taking the Chinese chestnut and crossing it with the American chestnut, and the Chinese chestnut is blight resistant. So there's a stand of these in a farm that's adjacent to the location of the funk on the Reinhardt University campus. And the students really got a blast out of visiting that and actually eating some chestnuts. We also have right on campus some Yalpin holly. And it used to be the primary ingredient from the Black Drink, which was a ritual drink that was used for forever. Of course, corn. We grow corn there in our free citrus garden, and the students got a chance to make their own corn husk dolls, which they really enjoyed. Bird watching was a popular activity always. We have an ornithologist from Fernbank who comes down and helps us with that. And of course, the people, and you're going to get a chance to meet some of the people today, like Simone. There in the center, standing next to her favorite painting. She's with the Eastern Band and one of our student workers. And of course, our volunteers. All of what we do at the museum would not be possible really without our volunteers. So this is what I want to spend some time talking about today with Dr. Jones. Our grant projects, we have the National Endowment for Humanity funded 2 major grant projects for us. One was the Landmarks Workshop, where social studies teachers from all over the country came to Reinhardt campus to get a deep dive into the Trail of Tears. We brought in tribal counselor of the Cherokee Nation, Julia Coates, to teach courses to these teachers. And we went and visited a lot of the sites that were involved with the Trail of Tears, like the Chieftain's Museum, which was the major ridge home, New Echota, which was the capital of the Cherokee Nation, and the Van House as well. And they got to learn about the Trail of Tears in the places where these things occurred. And this is the one that we're, I guess, most proud of, is the Cherokee Voices Project, which was a grant project that was led by Dr. Jones, which he's going to talk about in just a moment. And the reason this is crucial for us is we want to be a platform to elevate Native voices. And Native voices are not just voices from the present, but also voices from the past. So often in schools, if the Trail of Tears is talked about at all, it doesn't really afford an opportunity for Native people to tell these stories. But the sources are there in the claims. There were claims, thousands of claims that were filed by Cherokee citizens against the United States government in the 1830s and 1840s. And they go into great detail in these claims about where they lived in Georgia, what happened to them, what detachment they went in, what they owned, what they lost, and where they resettled in the West. So the problem is these are inaccessible largely because they have not been transcribed and not been put into a database. So we are working with the Trail of Tears Association and Mike Wren specifically with the Trail of Tears Association to have students like Christopher Walker, who's here today, is one of them, to work over the course of a year to transcribe these claims and put them into an online national database so that historians and Cherokee people can learn about their own history as told by their own people. So from my point of view, we're about making connections. Catherine Foreman Gray came from the Cherokee Nation. She had ancestors who were included Nancy Ward, who was there in Ball Ground. There's a battlefield there that we went and visited with her. Where her ancestor, it was Kingfisher, had fallen in battle, and Nancy Ward picked up his weapon and continued the battle and inspired the Cherokees to overcome the Creeks and to claim that section of Northwest Georgia. So, and also took her to the ferry site, the Downing Ferry, which is on Lake Altoona, which is her ancestors were the Downings. And it allowed her to actually put feet on the land where her ancestors had lived. And started this work with the Cherokees Association. We made contact with some of the Soap descendants. The Soap Creek Elementary School had reached out to us to try and learn more about the Soaps from which they take their name, from Soap Creek. And they had this drawing of the ancestor, Old Soap, and had this poem that was written that was on the wall. And the legend that was enshrined in this poem talked about how the people around him, the white people, felt sorry for him because he was so old, he could not make it on the Trail of Tears. And they let him stay in Georgia and to live there. And thanks to the kindly whites who said he didn't have to go on the Trail of Tears. Of course, that story is totally bogus. And we actually tracked down the descendants, which included Chris Soap and Charlie Soap. Charlie Soap was the husband of Chief Wilma Mankiller. And they came down and we took them to Soap Creek and also to the elementary school so they could come face to face with the reality of the fact that these people did go on the Trail of Tears, that Old Soap went on the Trail of Tears. He died on the Trail of Tears, but his descendants live on. And Chris at the time was on the tribal council. So it's not that these are vanishing people. We don't need to perpetuate this idea of the disappearing Indian because the Indians are right here. They've always been here, still here. And we do a disservice to create these myths about this. So when we were working on an exhibit about the Trail of Tears at Reinhardt, again, I wanted to find, well, who are the people actually living on the Reinhardt campus? How do we find this out? Are there descendants that we could reach out to help us when we're designing this exhibit? And sure enough, in the diary of Nathaniel Reinhardt, the university takes its name from the Reinhardt family. He said, in the spring, many U.S. soldiers were passing through the country for the purpose of collecting and removing the Cherokee Indians to the west. And they frequently lodged at my father's house. And we saw old Four-Killer, a neighbor Indian, just after he'd been arrested by the soldiers who were carrying him to Fort Buffington. That's on the other side of Canton. They treated him rather cruelly, which excited my sympathies very much in his favor. The old Indian desired to see father, who solicited better treatment on his behalf. And he left all his keys with father. And after the Indians had been collected by the soldiers and started in their final march off, they came near our house the first night and camped. He actually caught the measles from the soldier. But they lodged with them that night. So here we have it, the Reinhardts, from whom Reinhardt University takes its name, and this episode that happened with the Four-Killers, who were their neighbors. So I reached out to Jack Baker on the Trail of Tears Association, and he put me in contact with Melanie Four-Killer and also Paisley Raby and some other Four-Killer descendants. And so they were involved in consulting with us on developing this Trail of Tears exhibit and actually came to the opening of the exhibit as well. So again, these people have not disappeared. These people are here. And anytime we do an exhibit, a program, we need to reach out to them, especially when it involves NAGPRA, which we're also going to talk about. So that's what we do. That's how we do things at the Funk Heritage Center. To talk more about this today, I have with me Simone Cramer Thorne from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, Dr. Andrew Jones from Reinhardt University, Steve Mathis from the Cherokee Nation and the Georgia Community Alliance, and Ariana Persico, who's with the Chippewa, and also the Native American Student Association president from the University of Georgia. So please, next to Simone, if you could step up and we'll continue on.
So as you know, it's Native American Month, Heritage Month. I was doing this on women in the early Cherokee Republic. I did come to find out, well, and I'm known, OCO, hello? 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 So moving forward, my people with pride. Learned in the beginning of time, there was a cure for everything God put upon earth. My people have always accepted these things of God, and that's why they can get along with what some folks think is so little. My great grandmama, Aggie Lossie, the recipe that I handed out, she would always say this. She's amazing, but that stuck with me growing. Let's see, and she would also say, Grandpa, you should have seen the look on that man's face when I handed him that piece of good bean bread. That stuck with me too. And with that being said, her grandpapa was Chief John Ross. And I want to talk about her a little bit, as well as Sailor, but touching on Aggie Ross Lawson. She was the bread maker. Grandpapa John Ross, he was the first chief of the Indian Republic. 4 sons, 1 daughter, 28 grandchildren, 16 great-grandchildren. She's famous for yellow jacket soup and fried locusts. She has a book, To Make My Bread. Grandpapa fought with Andrew Jackson, Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, in the War of 1812. Ross was exiled with other Cherokees in 1836, traveled the infamous Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. He was elected 10 successful 4-year terms. That's 40 years. Principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. He died in office, and he knew Thomas Jefferson. Statistics, as Native American population, blows your mind. He was talking about it, Jeffrey. But California, you see, Oklahoma, Arizona, Texas, Georgia has 37,000. Let's see, Alabama, 21,000, South Carolina, 15,000, North Carolina, 109,000, Pennsylvania, 20,000. And more, growing, right? Wilma Mankiller. An entire body of knowledge can be dismissed because it is not written, while material written by obviously biased men is readily accepted as reality. That stuck with. Let's see, Selu Miss Eve. As you know, Selu was the first woman who provided corn and beans. Touching on her, she's known as the mother. It's a Cherokee first woman, cosmology, the goddess of corn. She planted her very own heart so no one would go hungry. Let's see, she teaches us to refertilize the earth to bring us substance we need. She's the goddess of magic, wisdom, and healing. Moving forward, let's see. Selu meets Eve. Cherokees had always regarded women as different from men, just as Kanakti did, the first man. Provided game. Selu, the first man, provided corn and beans, but each enjoyed distinct arenas of power. Each complemented the power of one another. The new view of womanhood promoted by policymakers, agents, and missionaries also recognized different, but the roles ascribed to women left them in a distinctly subservient, largely powerless position. But we could spin wheels. They would carry them on their back, these spinning wheels. So Christianity emphasized a hierarchy that placed men above women, and the growing romanticism of the period imbued the Protestant theology of intense emotionalism. Let's see, any attempt to determine how civilized or how traditional the Cherokees were in the years immediately prior to removal is likely to be fruitless. We were civilized. We are civilized. Cherokee society is enormously complex in this period, and the Cherokees themselves combined old and new ways in an infinite variety. The clans of the 7 clans. I'm the Bird Clan, the messenger. But the clans, no satisfaction shall be demanded for the victim's life, for his relatives, or the clan he may belong to. If one member of the clan intentionally killed one another, he shall be accounted guilty of murder and suffer accordingly. In class, we talked about eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but you killed my brother. We're coming for your brother. Just one though, just one. Okay, private property, we'll talk about the Cherokee men and women. Private property, clothing and jewelry stayed with the body, the corpse. American Revolution came along, traded goods, guns, hoes, deerskins for guns and ammunition. Tradition, the hoes and kettles were passed down generation to generation. Materials too, I'm sure. Central role, what belonged to the family, what belonged to the individual, is that less important? All these questions arose. So, see, tradition. The traditional Cherokee judicial system, we're a sovereign nation, we vote. We vote. The traditional Cherokee judicial system based on retribution and the clan vengeance seemed inadequate to deal with new species of property, particularly when it involved the ambiguous legal relationship between Cherokees and neighboring whites. So the ever-changing world, and it kept changing. And Thomas Jefferson again, and it links back to what I found about grandmama. I mean, Thomas Jefferson circa 1808 wrote, once you have property, you will want laws and magistrates to protect your property and person. And they listen. And that's history. So we talk about light horse, which were the police. And I always think state patrol. I always think state patrol when I think of light horse. So suppressing horse stealing and robbery of properties. Yeah. So going back. So Cherokee Nation shifted local councils to national government. Keeping on. A centralized Cherokee government originated in the late 18th century out of the need to coordinate foreign policy and to protect the entire nation from violence provoked by the actions of individual warriors. The Cherokee Republic, with written laws and constitution, centralized authority, delegated power, and emerged from this agenda. Property concerned men and women, but culture and history conditioned them to think about property in different ways. Everything had a meaning, so it was so hard to divide. Whether it be property, everything has meaning. In Cherokee law, different kinds of property embodied different values, which found expression in gender, protection of individual rights characterized the Cherokees' approach to personal property. They struggled to reconcile, creating a code of laws, which individual and community, private, public, men and women, balance. Have to have balance. Instead of recognizing land as a commodity, the Cherokees developed a bifurcated system of property holding, and they individually owned personal items, livestock, enslaved persons, improvements such as houses or fences that person erected on the land itself, as well as natural resources belonged to the nation. Property became the major concern of Cherokee Republic. In attempting to protect both private and common property, Cherokee government intersected the lives of women in profound ways. We kept growing. The women they were the heart. So a little bit of timeline, 1817, 1819, Cherokee government. Cherokee women wrote petitions to resist pressure to assimilate to Anglo-American culture and give up Cherokee land to the U.S. government. My mom, it's 92, she's a Lossie, a Ross. She was, I think she said 1948 before they could vote. So anyway, 1827, the Cherokee Constitution was passed, which disenfranchised Cherokee women and prevented them from voting or holding public office. She was born in 48. So, okay. 1898, the Curtis Act allotted 160 acres to each male. The women only got 80 acres and had to marry two, weakened us, weakened women. Here came Wilma. Yeah. Wilma Mankiller became the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. She was the first woman elected to this role. Hospitals, sewage system, running water. She came in strong. So, but you got to think of Sacagawea, of course, Nancy Ward, but iconically, side of Marilyn Red, I love. But Wilma Mankiller. Keeping on, I love this. When you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. I love that. So Cherokee culture is not dead. We are very much alive. And Ski, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, so.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you all so much for having us again. I'm Dr. Andrew Jones. I'm an assistant professor of history at Reinhardt. I was thinking jokingly, like, to teach a history class at Reinhardt, you have to have a corduroy jacket, obviously. This is a uniform, I think. So, yeah, that's great. So what Jeff kind of told us is what's going on at the Funk Center. And again, if you haven't had a chance to visit us, we're not far away. All right, we're just about 30 minutes north of 285. You know, it's a great place to go. The education program is amazing. My son is 7. He's in 2nd grade in the Marietta City School system. And his class actually went to the Funk Center, right? You know, unrelated to my work at all. They were one of those classes that went. So I'd encourage you to make the pilgrimage. It's not that far. There's good places to eat and to recreate in Canton while you're up there. And what Simone did for us is lay the groundwork for the kind of history of the Cherokee people in what is now Georgia. I came on board at Reinhardt in 2022 when Reinhardt got funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities for a Sustaining Humanities Initiative project that we called the Cherokee Voices. And the goal of this project is to elevate and promote just that, Cherokee voices. How can the voices of actual Cherokee persons be brought to the forefront when we construct or reconstruct the narrative of the process of removal, right, of the Trail of Tears? And central to this is something that Jeff already mentioned, which is the claims, right? So what are these claims? What you can see actually here on the kind of background on my first slide is a section of one of the claims. These are documents that are taken longhand by agents of the Cherokee Nation. And there are, as Jeff said, thousands of them. These claims are in many cases digitized, but not transcribed. So what we did in this project is attempting to use money given to us from the grant, from the NEH, to hire me and then to hire student workers to spend the long hours required to transcribe these documents from their 19th century longhand into a Microsoft Word document that can be uploaded onto the Trail of Tears Association website and then accessed by anybody, right? And the goal being primarily to provide access to the descendants of the Cherokee people who were removed, people like the Soap family, like the Four Killer family. So before I move on a little bit, I want to briefly do a teacherly thing and kind of minorly embarrass one of my top stars. So here, Christopher, can you stand up real quick? Okay, here we go. So the project would have been impossible without 3 amazing student interns. For a year, we had Christopher Walker, Camille McKinney, and Sydney Murray. And these 3 students were all upper level history students or interdisciplinary studies students at Reinhardt. And they were fantastic. I taught them 19th century paleography for about 2 weeks, and then they had it, right? For the next 2 semesters on their own, I assigned them various kind of claims, and they would spend 10 to 15 hours a week transcribing these claims. I would then edit them, and we'd put them up onto the Trail of Tears Association website. So that's kind of the gist of the project we did. Again, here's a little bit of background. The Funk Center is key. The NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, is the mother organization. The Sustaining Humanities Initiative project is the kind of under umbrella initiative there. Jeff obviously is the kind of the godfather of the Cherokee Voices project. He's humble. He likes to push it my way, but I'm going to push it back to him right now. And there would be no Cherokee Voices without Jeff. Somebody that Jeff already mentioned too, who is kind of a figure who looms large in all of this work as far as the Cherokee Nation history goes, is a guy named Mike Wren. And Mike, along with other people in the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, had spent years, if not decades, prior to the claims project collecting these claims. Now, these claims didn't just exist in one repository. They weren't in one building like the National Archives. They were all over the place. They were at the Gilcrease Museum. They were at the State Archives in Oklahoma. They were at the Tennessee State Archives. They were in Chattanooga in private collections. So before we could even do this project, people like Mike Wren helped gather the actual sources together, digitized them, and uploaded them so that we could transcribe them. So it's a multi-year, multi-party project involving many different kind of people, institutions, and I was just proud to be a part of it. So the goals were transcription, digitization, and access. Transcribe these sources, upload them to the Trail of Tears Association website, and then give people access to these sources for genealogy, for historical research, and things of that nature. Historical research is obviously my kind of field as an historian. So when I went into this project, I was thinking, what can these sources tell us about the history of the Cherokee people and the Cherokee Nation that other sources don't tell us? So the project that I kind of put together for today is attempting to kind of explain the ways in which these 1838 Cherokee Nation claims help us nuance the history that we think we know about the removal process and provide a more robust Native voice in that story. So the findings. What we found in the claims are data and narratives. Every claim includes a number of lists. In these lists, what happens were the Cherokee claims agents prior to removal to Oklahoma in 1838-39, the claims agents from the Cherokee Nation would meet with individual Cherokee men and women, right, in terms of gender access and gender equality. A lot of Cherokee women's voices are here, put in the foreground where they aren't in other sources. And they would say basically what I left. So in the Treaty of New Echota, the treaty that led to the Trail of Tears, one of the stipulations is that in theory, the Cherokee people would be recompensated for their loss of property, right? So that's where the claims come from. So what they would say, I gave up 2 cows and 2 calves, right? 2 yearlings, 6 cribs of corn, right? 1 cabin with this kind of flooring, 1 outbuilding. So the first thing we see in the claims are enumerations of data, and that is property that they were forced to abandon, property that they lost during removal. The second thing we see in every single claim, and the thing that's most compelling, are narratives. These Cherokee people tell us how they lost their property, and in some cases, who took it from them. They name names. There are individual white settlers from the area that's now North Atlanta and the suburbs, who became prominent later on, who were named as culprits in stealing Cherokee property. Raise your hand if you've ever driven north from Atlanta up towards Marietta and crossed Powers Ferry Road. Anybody know Powers Ferry Road? Yeah. So, who are the Power family? The Power family were a family of settlers who arrived on the Chattahoochee in the 1830s and 40s. And in one of the claims from 1842, one of the Cherokee claimants says that the progenitor of the Power family stole property, right? So these families, these names we think about when we think of Atlanta topography, right? A lot of these names are the earliest white settlers who were actually complicit in the theft of Cherokee property. Okay? So again, as an historian, as a nerd who likes historiography and kind of contextualization, what I wanted to do was find out the way in which these claims could provide a more robust understanding of the Cherokee past. So what I did was look at local histories. So there's a large collection of local histories about the Cherokee Nation East, and especially the North Georgia Cherokee Nation that exist, including Don Shadburn's Cherokee Planters, and then Charles Walker's Cherokee Footprints. And these are incredible resources, right? These books provide real data and real access, but they didn't actually include the 1838 claims. And if they had access to the 1838 claims, these local histories would not only give more credence to Native voices, but they would have more data to work with. So that's one thing I wanted to look at. The second thing, or the theme of kinship networks and community. Now, one thing we see in the claims are examples of the Cherokee idea of gadugi, right? Gadugi is this idea of community involvement or kinship. And in the claims, we see examples of Cherokee neighbors going to support or protect their fellow national members, their fellow neighbors in various ways. Simone also mentioned horse theft and the light horse, right? One thing that happened in the period before removal was a lot of horse theft. And there was a group operating out of Carrollton, Georgia called the Pony Club. These are white horse thieves who would ride into the Cherokee Nation, steal horses, and ride back out. As an example, in the claims of a woman being robbed of her horses by the Pony Club, her neighbor jumps on his horse and chases the horse thieves across the border of Cherokee Nation, right? So we see kinship and community coming through in the sources, embodying this kind of Gadugi ethic in ways that are described by other scholars like Adam Pratt and Rose Strimlau, working with other kinds of sources. So my argument here is that the 1838 claims accentuate other kinds of scholarship being done in the last 10 years that focus on these kinds of ideas. Okay, and that again especially relates to the Pony Club. The other thing we see in the 1838 claims are things that relate to issues of race and slavery. Now, there are a robust kind of literature on the relationship between the African-American community, the Cherokee community. Early in this process was Theda Perdue. Her book, Slavery and the Evolution of Cherokee Society, kind of began to really open up this scholarship. And then Taya Miles kind of expanded it even further with her incredible books, including The House on Diamond Hill, that talk about the Van House. So what we saw in the claims were examples, again, hard, complex examples of things that contemporarily would have been referred to as slave theft, right? So in some of the claims, the Cherokee people actually claim that white citizens incurred into their tribal boundaries, stole their enslaved persons, who at that point would have been considered their property, and removed with them beyond the borders of the Cherokee Nation. So there are examples in the Cherokee Phoenix, which is the kind of the Cherokee language newspaper, of escaped slave ads and things like this. But the 1842 claims provide us with even more data of these kinds of complex issues and relating to enslavement, race, and identity in the Cherokee Nation. Women and gender, again, the thing that's really unique about the claims is that there are hundreds of women who also are giving their claims to these claims agents and having their voices heard in an era where women's voices weren't heard at all, right? So that's another way that this really, I think, promotes the Cherokee voice. One woman that I'll mention briefly before I move on and hand the baton on to the next person is in relation to a woman named Nancy Still. So this relates to memorialization, restitution, and women. In the claims, there's one claimant who comes up again and again and again. It's a woman named Nancy Still. Now, if you go to Buckhead or Sandy Springs, there is a statue, in theory, to Nancy Still. And she's here, she's holding a peach, and she has a little child at her feet. And there is this idea that Nancy Still was a younger woman, right? And there was a Nancy Still who wrote a letter to Governor Lumpkin requesting a reprieve from the removal policies. But what we found in the sources is that Nancy Still, who filed claims against the U.S. government, was actually an older woman. So there's still a lot to unpack in terms of who is Nancy Still. But there's a possibility that there either, one, the memorial to Nancy Still is inaccurate, right? Kind of going back to these ideas of a disappearing Indian kind of idea. Or two, something that's even more kind of interesting and complex. There may have been two Nancy Stills within the Cherokee Nation. One who was a younger woman and one who was an older woman who was actually the mother of one of the detachment leaders on the Trail of Tears. So this is the kind of thing that has been enlightening to me, right? And I think has given us avenues for future scholarship as historians, as kind of as enthusiasts, and the like. So the last thing I'll say is restitution. So there's a book called After 100 Winters by Margaret Jacobs. and it talks about the processes of restitution, of repatriation or rematriation of items, artifacts, and property from white communities back to Indigenous families, Indigenous communities. And I don't really necessarily feel the ability to speak to, deeply on this as a white person and as a non-expert in this field. But at the very least, we can acknowledge that the Cherokee claims show the descendants of Cherokee people where their ancestors lived, right? It gives them access to the land in a way that can allow for potentially at least at the very least, some kind of a healing experience, like it seems the Soap family were able to experience. So these are the kind of things the Claim Project, I think, opened up historically and historiographically that we as archivists, historians, enthusiasts, genealogists can continue to explore beyond the scope of the project. So thank you all so much for having us, and I will now pass it on to Steve Mathis.
It's good to be with you today. I have to announce my full name is James Stephen Taylor Mathis. Of course, the Taylor is my mother's maiden, it's my mother's name, and she was Taylor, and she is also a Ballard, which is, if I was talking to somebody in the Cherokee Nation or somebody, they would know those names and know the ties. There's Taylors in all three tribes. But it's good. Again, it's good to be with you. I know I just have just a short time here to explain a lot of stuff. I'm with Georgia Cherokee Community Alliance. It is a chartered at-large community of the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee Nation visits Georgia once a year, or at least since 2018. We formed the group in 2018, and I think it's around Marietta. I was living in East Texas, and we were moving to Georgia, and so I contacted some Cherokee Nation citizens in Georgia, and we met. And there was also some from the Eastern Band that was there too. And as a matter of fact, the Eastern Band, one of the guys, he brought bear claws to gift everybody, that was there. But we've had formed GCCA, and I didn't know at that time what it would evolve to or and it still is kind of. It's kind of, to me, I'm kind of stand back from it because I was just going to try to form a community just for fellowship and for Cherokees, something that we might could get together and begin to look at what's needed cultural wise. But since that time, and of course, barring COVID, since that time, the last couple of years especially, one of the doctors for Georgia Gear there at Emory, they usually, geriatrics, that's what they're in. They get grants from HRSA, and they were needing, it's a 5 year grant. And so they were needing a tribe or a tribal association on this grant for this last year. And they contacted another doctor that's working there that's on the board at Emory, which was a Cherokee Nation citizen. And they kind of correlated, and then they approached me. So we submitted the forms of what they needed. And of course, they received their grant, and we received a 5 year grant, and of course, they're still in the developing plans. But I had a contact sheet for about 350 Cherokees in the Georgia and surrounding areas. And we had 9 out of mine, we had 9 that were actually in the healthcare field and that wanted to get involved. Well, since that time, also the Cherokee Nation has jumped on board, and they're giving the communities $25,000 each for health and wellness of the Cherokees in Georgia. And so we formed an alliance, or forming an alliance with these various ones that's in the healthcare field, or those that's interested in it. And they're the ones that's going to be responsible for the distribution or how this is all going to operate. Now, that's just one area. Now, we have the yearly meetings that I mentioned. This last year, it was in my mind to bring it to Dahlonega before the chief and the representatives come. And there was, the specific purpose in that is because you see so much happen, in other areas where the Cherokees were removed, but not much in that area there. So, and that's where I live too. So, but anyway, we brought the Cherokee Nation there, and you don't hear a word. As a matter of fact, about 400 people in attendance, 400 Cherokees from Georgia, and there's also the newspaper that was there, but you didn't, no reporting, no nothing. So this is present. What I'm talking about is kind of the present state concerning Cherokees in Georgia. I wasn't expecting all this when I come in as far as kind of the operations. How many watched the Braves as far as here a while back, or you heard statements concerning the Braves acknowledging the state tribal associations and stuff and presenting them with things? Did anybody see that? I know Jacqueline did. Jeff did. Okay. I was hoping more hands would go up. But there was a Cherokee Nation actual chief. He said, that the Braves owed him an apology. And there was a resolution with the 5 tribes there in Oklahoma that, that said, how you owe us an apology. Well, one of the representatives that's on the board of Indian Concerns stood up and says, well, I don't think they do, and she voiced her opinion. But there's a need to, when you're talking about Cherokees and you're talking about Georgia and you're talking about history, well, when you look at today, there's a need to bring a resolve. And that's one of the things that I'm moving toward is creating an alliance to make change. Because there's some things that have taken place in this recent history that has caused that conflict. And if there's ever going to be a healing to take place, well, then you're going to have to resolve the conflict, and there's going to have to be a working together. I think it was mentioned how many Cherokees not Cherokees, how many Indians are in Georgia? You said 37,000?
Yeah.
Something like 37,000? I know 2,500 of them are Cherokee Nation citizens, and I can tell you what county they're in. There's 4 or 5 counties that have over 100 families living in them. But when you're talking about that many, and then you turn around and look at federal programs, there's no federal programs in Georgia for Indians. You look surrounding, and they're all the way around. It's they're fully qualified, but when it comes to Georgia, there's nothing. So, there's a lot of questions there and a lot of things I think that the public or the people don't know. So we're going to form an alliance to bring truth to face to where people can make decisions today off what they know. We can study history and find out what happened in history. But when we're looking at today, what can we do to make things better? I tell you this, have we been paid yet on that? Oh, you did all that stuff.
Oh, no.
You mean the ladies didn't get paid? Okay. But the historical information that was plain, that was in those documents, I think the missionaries that the government fought so hard to get rid of, they kept records, if I'm correct. They kept records. So any kind of records like that, that's invaluable as far as when you go back and start studying that. But but we have a yearly meeting this year. I'm not sure where it's going to be. We've yet to decide. It's going to be in one of the more populated areas as far as Cherokee Nation citizens. But there's been anywhere from 400 to 500 each time that have come to the meetings. And the registration department comes so they can renew their pictured ID. There's also those from cultural presentations that come. And it's just it's a time where we kind of come together and we are able to hear what's going on in the Cherokee Nation, as well as they're able to experience and know what's going on here. But I guess it's the 13th. I've got a presentation, which I'll have a lot more slides, and a part of that presentation is going to deal with forming an alliance. And if you're interested in kind of getting in and working, especially if you have any government ties,
that'll be at the Funk Heritage Center.
That's at the Funk Heritage Center, but the 13th at 2:00 in the afternoon. And I'll have more slides and I'll be more organized because I really just shoot from the hip today. By the way, I represent 10, I like to say this, I represent 10 cousins and 3 siblings, other siblings. And I say that most of them's done crossed over. A lot of them have. I say that because, I don't just stand here by myself. When we was raised as a unit. And that's the way most Cherokee families grow up. When they started revitalizing the language, some of the guys that was heading that up in Oklahoma, they went up to the various mountains and areas there, and there was different family units or family groups. Well, my family unit was in Dallas, Texas. That's where I grew up. But we grew up just like that. I mean, if I had one mother, I had 5 mothers. Speaking of my aunts, and they were very strong. All the Taylor women were very strong women, and of the four that was married, counting my mother, there's not a one of the husbands that would tell you we wouldn't have what we have today if it wasn't for my wife. In other words, they were very strong in the culture itself. You know, unless you study it and experience it, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. I talked to a historian after they gave a presentation concerning Major Ridge, you know, and was talking about the change in the Cherokee Nation. And I asked, well, what did the women play in that role? And well, that had been done away with. And I thought, my mind, it's never been done away with, you know. As far as that same strength that the Cherokee woman has, they have brought that all these years. We adopted, I think the Constitution was adopted in 24, the Discovery and Gold in 28. But if you go to Tahlequah, visit some of the sites, visit the old courthouse. The old courthouse has the laws of the Cherokees, just like the U.S. had its laws. Well, when you look at the laws of the Cherokee Nation back before 1900, what you're going to find is a lot stronger and a lot more rigid law-based than what the U.S. had. In other words, they were pretty strong as far as convictions. Up until 1899, the Cherokee Nation had its own government, its own operation. But with the Dawes Act, they were trying to dissolve the government of the Cherokee Nation. Well, they had to close down all the courthouses, close down all the, jails, let everybody out. And, as far as my family history, I can tell you in 1901, not a little over a year after they closed it all down, I had a great-grandfather got killed in Chelsea jail. And of course, there was some things that went on, and there was a problem between him and the jailer. But there, it wasn't right. Same way with some of the land grants, that wasn't right. In other words, Cherokees have been fighting the whole time, but even in those fights, we still push forward. We're still here, and I would have never thought I would have been here today, but we're still here. I would have never thought that, hey, I have to take on, and to be honest with you, we call it a fraudulent tribe when Georgia, and I've said this, I'll sew this up pretty quick, but, when I meet people, a lot of times I said, it's amazing Georgia can remove the Indians and then create their own tribes. I said, they remove the Cherokees and put them in Oklahoma, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, they got a Cherokee tribe. Well, something just don't click right with that, especially when it's not in association with that tribe, and it creates a separation with that tribe, So, that's some of the things that we're going to address. Why in history, what happened that caused that conflict. I visited UNG when I was looking to try to find a spot for the Cherokee Nation this last year to come visit in June. And as I got talking to the history professor, the first thing she said is, we're doing a land acknowledgement. And I said, and of course, well, that's good. And they was talking about the state was excited, and some others were kind of on board. And I said, well, have you contacted the Cherokee Nation yet? And she said, well, she called the other lady that was kind of over the contacts, called her in. They got to look and said, no, we emailed the Eastern Band, but we didn't get a response. But, and she went into all this of, well, we're going to have these plaques, we're going to have these names. And I said, well, that's the wrong spelling for the Cherokee on that, as far as when you're referring to it. And I says, you do know that they took them from here and put them in Oklahoma, don't you? And she stopped when I said that. And I says, there's so much wrong about it. I said, you really don't want to, you don't want to be an embarrassment with what you present. She put stuff on a temporary hold, and it wasn't, but 2 or 3 visits, they had it on a permanent hold. And she kind of now understands where we were coming from on it. And they're trying to do some things in Dahlonega, and that's my home. But, and I don't like to cause adversity, but I still stand for truth. I can't stand by and watch things happen when they're not right. And I guess that's part of how I was raised, and part of how I am. But anyway, just to close this up, I want to invite anybody that would like to join with us, align with us. You can go to GCCA on Facebook page. You got a contact there. Jacqueline, she's the one that headed up the history course. you know, that come in at Funk. And anyway, she has my contact, but anybody you want to contact me and we can, I'm more a one-on-one person type person, but at the same time, if I've got things correlated, I can present things too in a correlated fashion. But I just want to think about Cherokees today. It's good that we can look back and study, but let us look at what can we do if something's not right. What can we do as citizens? You know, I mean, we have a voice. So what can we do to help make changes for the better, especially when it affects, you know, I'd love to see Georgia have a good relationship with the Oklahoma tribes, but there's going to have to be some major changes for that to happen. And really, it's not their fault in Oklahoma. The problem was created by the legislature in Georgia, and they're going to have to realize that and make some changes to be able to create that relationship that's needed. And that relationship will help bring healing to Indians as well as to Georgians, because once Georgians realize, you know, what's happened, then they're not going to, you know, they would like to see some type of resolution. We're not talking about a restaurant. You know, talking about giving back land. I went to one function there and I moved in a little subdivision and all my neighbors were there and we were sitting there eating in that little function and the neighbor says, well, what do you expect to get out of this? And the other neighbor says, tell him his land. Didn't want to prod him. And I said, I said, the thing is just to straighten out some things and bring them to the forefront, you know, of facts. And that way people will know, you know, and that kind of will help drive, you know, who you speak to as far as in the legislation or who you support. So, and it'll give you something to question about, but we're going to be pulling materials together for that too. But anyway, just thank you again, Jeff. And I thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak next week, because I'll have some more slides and stuff, because I do have some slides that can kind of show you exactly what's going on. And I think, you know, also as far as the number of Cherokees in the counties, you know, that I believe Cobb has a high volume. I know we usually, the first two gatherings we had there in Marietta, and we might end up going back to Marietta this year. So, but anyway, thank you very much, and thank you.
Hello, everyone. I know we are over time, so I will try to keep it short and sweet, but informative. Again, my name is Ariana Persico. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Georgia. I'm also the NAGPRA coordinator at the University of Alabama, and I am a Turtle Mountain Chippewa descendant, which I know we've heard some other people say that they are citizens of certain nations. Everyone in my family is a citizen on my mother's side, except for my mother and I. So we are considered descendants and not citizens of our tribe, which, you know, can complicate things, right? It's different how you approach your own ancestry. It's different how you approach the things that I do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about NAGPRA. NAGPRA is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It's a federal law that was passed in 1990. And the first version of the law said that all institutions that received funding from the federal government had 5 years to comply with the law. And essentially they had to inventory their collections for ancestral remains and associated funerary objects. Well, we're here in 2024 and some places still haven't done that, including the place that I work at. The place that I work at currently was threatened with a lawsuit last year by 7 tribal nations that said, if you don't comply with NAGPRA after 40 years, we're going to sue you. And after that, you know, everybody kind of picked up the pace. The university picked up the pace. My boss was a part of a repatriation of 10,000 ancestors just from Moundville, Alabama, back to 7 different tribal nations. So it's great. You know, NAGPRA is one of the only ways that we as Native folks have codified in the law of the United States government as, you know, a reparation. It is a way to protect our past and it is a way to protect our future. And it's one of the only things that we have. as Native folks. We're considered domestic dependent nations by the United States government, and they want to tell us what to do, but not tell us how, give us any help to do it, right? And NAGPRA is kind of one of those ways where we're bridging the gaps between tribal nations and the federal government. Unfortunately, it does have a consequence for smaller museums like, the Funk Heritage Center and for other museums across the country, because a lot of the stuff, the ancestors and the objects were on display in some of these museums when they shouldn't be. So, you can go to a museum and it's empty because of NAGPRA. Moundville, Alabama has their own museum on site, and half of the museum is empty because all of the objects that were in there were funerary objects and should not be on display. So now we're faced with this future of, okay, well, how do we go from here? Because at the end of the day, everything costs, it's time and money. And it's a lot of time and it's a lot of money to do these things. And until you can associate objects to determine whether they are burial goods or not, you just can't put them back out, in the museum. And it has an effect on museums. It has an effect on how people are engaging with the public and how people are engaging with history and learning and knowledge. That being said, NAGPRA is still an incredible opportunity for Native folks to deal on a nation-to-nation basis with institutions, with state governments, and with the federal government. I'll admit, I came to Jeff wanting to work with the Funk on my dissertation after I wrote kind of a mean review of the Funk Heritage Center. It wasn't mean. It was just, the Funk is great, but we have a lot of work to do at the same time, right? I'll admit it. I wrote it for a review for the Public Historian. But I stand by the fact that the Funk is one of the only institutions in the South, small or large, that is participating in these reparative repatriation processes, where they are reconsidering what our museum looks like and where it can go from here. I was trained in NAGPRA at the University of Georgia, and then I come to Alabama and I'm trying to bring, my knowledge and experience here. And there's, it's a lot of red tape. It's a lot of bureaucracy that you have to go through to just do the right thing. As a Native person, I'm from California. Indigeneity is kind of everywhere in California. It's kind of everywhere on the West Coast. And you come to places in the South and it's not really acknowledged in the same way. The University of Georgia has almost 50,000 students between undergraduate and graduates. And there's 20 Native students or people who identify as Indigenous on that campus. And as Jeff mentioned, I'm the president of the Native American Student Association. And we can get maybe about 10 folks to come and, kind of create community on that campus. And, we're expected by the university, who gives us money to be an organization, to do outreach, to teach people about our cultures and what we do. But it's kind of hard when not one single member of the Native American Student Association is Muskogee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw. None of us are from here. We're all from different nations. We're from, spread out all across North America. And so we really created NASA as a place to have Indigenous community. We've talked a lot about kinship and, we rely on each other, whether we're related or not. We're all cousins, we all support each other and we're all there for each other at the same time. And NAGPRA is no exception to that kinship and that community that, NASA kind of espouses. We have a lot of these connections from the smallest organization at a very large SEC school to a federal law. And I am amazed at the work that is continually being done by and for Native folks. So if anybody has any questions and you'd like to talk further about NAGPRA or work that's being done, I'm happy to answer anything and everything. But thank you so much for having me today, and it was an honor to be here.
Just want to thank once more the Georgia Archives for having us here today, and thank my colleagues for being here with us. And as you see, that there's so much work to be done, and we at the Funk Heritage Center are proud to be a partner, a colleague with tribal citizens to do the work. And every day we're doing the work, and we could continue doing the work. So I don't know if we have time for maybe a few questions or not.
We've got time for a few questions.
Okay. If you have questions for any of us, please, yes.
I have a couple of questions, actually. How many claims have y'all gathered? And what percentage have been transcribed?
I think we, in total, probably around 2,000 have been transcribed. And that's just for, I didn't even go into this. We are only focusing on the Hickory Log District. So the Hickory Log District is only one of the electoral districts in the Cherokee Nation East. So there are 8,000 to 10,000 other claims, probably, that haven't been transcribed.
It's a very time-consuming task, as Christopher can attest to.
Yeah.
To go through these. They're not always very legible. And so we started local. We said the Hickory Log is a judicial district that makes sense for us because we're right in the middle of that Cherokee judicial district. So that includes all the Cherokees that were living within the surrounding area of the Funk Heritage Center.
So, and are the ones that are not transcribed and the ones transcribed accessible to folks like us?
They're on the Trail of Tears national website. Leslie, do you know the URL for that? What's the URL for that?
It's just national TOTA.com.
Yeah. So if you go on there, there's a section for claims, and that's where they all are. There's both the transcribed claims and the claims that are not transcribed. They are digitized, so you can see the original, the picture of the original document, but there's no transcription for most of them. But actually, it's open source too. Like if you have a group that wants to participate in transcriptions, then that opportunity is there. So, yes.
First of all, thank you. This was really interesting. I'm definitely going to let my students know about the claims so that they can go into them and, investigate. Ariana, I have a question for you. What happens to the funerary items when they are returned to the different tribes?
So for context, Georgia, I can speak to Georgia specifically. When there are claims made for NAGPRA, there are 25 different tribal nations that have to be contacted to see the claim, essentially. It depends, mostly in Alabama and Georgia. Most nations will defer to the Muskogee Nation because the Muskogee Nation has, I don't want to say stronger ties, but they have I think a longer history in the region. And with the Muskogee, I can speak to the Muskogee Nation specifically. It's different, for each nation. So when ancestors and objects are returned, the official process is that the tribal nation has to apply to the federal government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, for land on their own land to rebury these ancestors and these objects. So once they get the land and the money to do that, there will be ceremonies. And everything that an ancestor or an associated object has touched will go back to the tribal nation. So we're talking boxes, paper bags, rubber bands, papers that were in the boxes, and normally they're burned. The preferred method is to use muslin when we're rebundling ancestors and objects for reburial and repatriation. But most tribes will have a ceremony, and it'll be either a cleansing ceremony, a reburial ceremony, sometimes all of the above. And that's normally what happens. And then the collections that are left over, we keep because they've been associated with a tribal nation, but we've determined that they're not burial. We can, depending on what the tribal nation wants to do, we can open it up for research to native and non-native people. We will keep them for, in perpetuity, basically. as kind of a repository for those nations.
Yes.
I was reading in the Cherokee Tribune a few weeks ago, this person that was writing an article mentioned that there were mounds in Cherokee at one time, but they were destroyed by farmers or whoever owns the land.
Mhm.
Where was that and what were they like? Where were they located in Cherokee?
600.
Yeah, anywhere along the major rivers, you're gonna find mound sites or sites that once were mound sites. The problem is that the farmers in the 1800s and in the 20th century also, they would plow those sites up. So, matter of fact, like in Rome, Georgia, there was a mound. It was destroyed to create downtown Rome. Certainly in places like Six's Town, which is in Cherokee County, you know, those sites are now under Lake Altoona, but you know, the mounds, a lot of them now, they don't look like they did. You won't see mounds that look like what you see at Etowah Indian mounds. It's more like what you might see the Kadua Mound in Cherokee. You might, if you go to North Carolina and you go to the Kadua Mound, it's not what it once was because of farming, because of erosion. It looks more like a hill, and you may not even know that it's a mound.
What do they keep in there?
What do they
is
keep?
it for?
Well, it depends. There's some mounds that have burials in them, and there are others that don't. So it just depends. And the only way you know sometimes is by excavating the mound, which nowadays we don't generally want to do. So
Was there any in Canton?
in Canton, well, Canton is not right on the river, so not that I'm aware of. I don't think there are any in Canton. But Hickory Log, which is just north, you know, where the Walmart's located.
Yeah.
That was a major site, and we have a lot of the artifacts at the museum and also at the University of Georgia. That site goes all the way back to the Archaic era. So there would have been certainly later Muskogee, Mississippian peoples, but then even into the historic era with Cherokees, it was a Cherokee town. So
Before Walmart built that store, were they able to take everything out of the ground or did Walmart, you know, I know they stopped them. Is there still?
now archaeologists actually intentionally many times leave much of the site unexcavated so that future archaeologists or whoever's interested, you know, can come and investigate that site later. So no, they did not actually take the whole site. So some of it's still there at Walmart under the asphalt. Yeah, one more question.
On the presentation, it showed a book about slavery and it had the ending date 1866. I was watching one of those genealogy programs and Don Cheadle was on there and his forebears were owned by the Chickasaw Indians and they weren't freed in 1865 as I guess all the other slaves in America were freed. It was 1866 because they were owned by a Indian tribe. So can you fill that out a little bit?
I don't know that I can really fill that out much other than what you've already said. I mean, yeah, there certainly were places that for whatever reason did not get the memo about.
Yeah, I can speak to that a
Yeah.
little bit. It really doesn't have anything to do with their status as sovereign nations, and the decisions to do that, because at the end of the day, they still had to abide by certain federal policies essentially, and they should still do. But Ty Miles wrote a great article about slavery in Native nations, and she basically said that Native folks after removal or during removal had to either enslave other people or die, and that they were presented with a possible choice. And that doesn't. And then you'll see often that in what's called the 5 civilized tribes, people can trace ancestry to both enslaved folks and to Native folks. So the year that it took for people to, stop enslaving people, I know if you look at some records on the West Coast, it's just because the news didn't reach them until a year later, like the Civil War ended and they had no idea the Civil War had ended. So sometimes there's not really a specific historical reason, but it could just be, time traveling, traveling across the country.
Yeah, they didn't have CNN back then. Or
Yeah.
So, thank you again very much. I think we're out of time, but yeah, Time Miles is definitely the go-to, source on that.